Alright, so now you guys are gonna get to see how I make my YouTube videos. Here's the live stream, and here's the YouTube. I'm looking tanned as fuck! Hey guys, welcome to the giveaway draw video. There's this video going, and there's this live stream. So this'll be interesting. It is now 5 o'clock. This is officially the time people are supposed to tune in to watch me draw some names. A lot of people entered. I was surprised this many people entered, and I'm really excited about that. I was worried that only like 2 people were gonna enter. Although I guess it would have been perfect if only 3 people entered, because then everyone would have won. But anyway, let's draw the first name. So I got my big tub. I made sure it was glass so that you guys could see I'm not, you know, cheating. I hope everyone wins. Obviously that's not gonna happen, but here we are. Okay, so the very first person is Ash Draken. She's a Isa at yahoo.com. So, number 1, Ash Draken. Fuck yeah, this is exciting. Number 2, is Lillian Lyford. So Lillian Lyford, which is Lil Perotto at gmail.com, is number 2. Woo! And remember, if you guys don't win, there is always the 15% discount code, which is Naomi King, if you guys just want to buy some jewelry. Okay. Last one. Some people don't know what they're tuning in for. This is the fucking giveaway, man. Alright. And last one is Maria Alvarado. So malvarado9339 at gmail.com. So we've got the 3 winners. Got Ash, Lillian, and Maria. So Doran will be getting in contact with you guys through email, I am assuming. And you guys are all gonna get to choose whatever style you want. If you didn't win, there's still 15%. And I do hope that we're gonna do another giveaway soon, because this is a lot of fun and I like giving back to you guys. So yes, Ash, Lillian, and Maria, congratulations. To everyone else, I'm really fucking sorry. I wanted you all to win. Hope you guys like this. Hope you guys enjoy the jewelry and shit. Take photos, tag. Yeah, until next time. Adios, motherfuckers.